This episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast is brought to you by Live Oak Bank. Live Oak strives to help you master your business and achieve your dreams. They know the work that it takes day in and day out to be a successful pharmacy owner. Your small business is more than just your livelihood, it's who you are. Live Oak Bank offers loans and financial solutions nationwide for pharmacies, and funding your business is just the beginning of the relationship. With Live Oak's dedication to efficiency, collaboration, and in-depth knowledge of the pharmacy industry, they'll take you where you need to go. Their team of industry experts fully understands the nuances of your specific business model, and they want to invest in you because they know you're ready to make an impact. Beyond the traditional banking experience, Live Oak strives to be an asset to each one of their customers by turning obstacles into opportunities. Let their team confidently guide you through the lending process and craft a unique plan that will help you and your business thrive. Visit liveoakbank.com/YFP to learn more. Again, that's liveoakbank.com/YFP.
When you decide to go for financial independence, you really have to fundamentally change your relationship with money. What I mean by that is that instead of viewing the money that you bring in simply as the stuff that you pay for goods and services with, you really need to think of money in terms of time.
Hi, I'm Tim Ulbrich, and today I'm excited to welcome to the show Dr. Jeff Keimer, author of the brand new book, FIRE-RX, The Pharmacist Guide to Financial Independence. Now, if you've heard about the FIRE movement before, acronym for Financial Independence, Retire Early, you know that this is a powerful strategy to build wealth and to put yourself in control of your financial future. Regardless of whether or not you have early retirement goals, achieving financial independence gives you options when it comes to how you spend your time and money. Jeff's new book, FIRE-RX, is your guide to reaching financial independence. FIRE-RX shows you how you can take control of your financial destiny and teaches you how to create an actionable plan to reach financial independence. To celebrate the release of this book with you, we're running an exclusive launch week discount, meaning you can get FIRE-RX for 20% off this week only. Visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/fire and order your copy of FIRE-RX by May 22nd to get this special discount. Again, that's yourfinancialpharmacist.com/fire. Can't wait for you to read it. Now let's bring the author of FIRE-RX onto the show, Dr. Jeff Keimer. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Hard to believe this is your first time on the podcast. You've written a number of great blog posts about FIRE investing, one about your debt-free journey that we have featured on the YFP website, and we'll certainly link to that in the show notes. But today we're going to be digging into your new book that is available to order called FIRE-RX, The Pharmacist Guide to Financial Independence. And I've been really excited about getting this book out. It's been a process. It's been a couple years in the making, and excited to get this into the hands of many pharmacists that I think will find great value from your writing. So before we get into the book, give us a little bit of background on your pharmacy career and what you've been doing as a pharmacist.
So I started in pharmacy actually quite a while ago. I was still in high school back in 2005. I started working for, if you remember, Eckerd Drug.
Yes.
Before they got bought out by Rite Aid, and then worked for Rite Aid and all throughout college. And, then took a position with a company called Kinney Drugs up here in Vermont. It's just a regional drug chain. And been working as a community pharmacist ever since.
Small world, Jeff. I interned for Eckerd Drug when I was a pharmacy student at the time. Coming back home in the summers in Buffalo, New York, we had Eckerd Drug, and I worked with them before that buyout happened with Rite Aid. So good memory. I think we're dating ourselves a little bit, by the way, when we talk about Eckerd Drug, and some students and others are listening like, what are you talking about? For those that are listening, and if you've been a part of the YFP Facebook group, you likely have seen Jeff's name pop up, who has been really active in that group and commenting, providing some great input and advice. And I think, Jeff, folks may be wondering, especially those that have interacted with you in that group, and obviously see that you're knowledgeable not only on this topic, but other areas of personal finance. How did you get interested in personal finance? Was this a topic that always was one that was of interest, or did something happen out of necessity that brought you into this world and I guess rabbit hole when it comes to personal finance?
So I think I've always had kind of an interest in finance in general. Maybe not in the application of it. If you run my Q&A in terms of how I was in my early years as a pharmacist, I definitely did not act like I was really interested in personal finance or whatnot. But I've always taken an interest in finance in general, especially investing. Then once Alex, my wife, and we started getting down this FIRE rabbit hole, I really got into it a lot more, really got to understand a lot more of the concepts, and it really played well to my interest. And especially, as you get later on down the ways, and like you're figuring out different ways to be able to solve your financial issues or invest better. Sometimes it can be kind of a game, which really appeals to me on that.
So what was it, you driving this forward? Was it Alex driving this forward? Was it both of you, pun intended, really that caught on fire with the FIRE concept? Tell me more about, for the two of you in your personal journey, how you guys really made this commitment towards financial independence and why that was a priority for you and your family.
So I think starting off, like I mentioned before, when I got out as a new practitioner, I really was not good with money. Kind of spent every dime in sight, to just on ridiculous things. I think I spent like $5,000 in a year on craft beer or something. But she gave me the push because she came from a much different mindset than I did when it came to money, and in particularly saving and really kind of establishing that financial position of strength. As time went on with our relationship, I had a really pretty bad balance sheet and she did not. I kind of got the hint that I needed to really kind of move myself in that direction, kind of get my house in order and up to her standards first. That's really where we started. The whole foray into FIRE came later after we got married. That became kind of a journey I took the lead on, but she was supportive at first and then really kind of came on board and really excited about it, as time went on and we made progress towards it.
And we've had a few pharmacists as guests on the podcast, like Jason Long on episode 104, Jared Wonders on episode 111, who have shared their own FIRE journey. We also had Scott Rickens, author of Playing with FIRE, on episode 188. But with that being said, I don't want to assume that all of our listeners are familiar with FIRE. I shared with you before we hit record, often when I'm speaking with a group of pharmacists and I introduce the concept of FIRE, many folks I find have not necessarily heard of that term before, but once I have a chance to explain a little bit more about what is financial independence all about, what is the FIRE movement or community all about, I can see there is certainly an interest that has peaked. And, folks that are interested in, hey, I want to learn more and see whether or not this is a path for my own personal financial journey. So before we dig more into the weeds on FIRE and the strategies you talk about in the book, give us the high level definition or overview of what exactly is FIRE.
Basically, FIRE is an acronym. It stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And I think that the acronym really it is in some ways self-explanatory, but what it actually is in practice is that you reach a stage in your personal finance journey where you reach financial independence, meaning your money is basically generating for you, not the money that you're having to work for, but the money that's being given to you in the form of dividends, capital gains, things from investments, or income from rental properties, or a business that you own that you're no longer having to really work the day-to-day from. Basically, that is covering all of your living expenses that you have in a year. So you don't have to work for money anymore, which then leads people into the retire early concept, in which case they may decide to totally stop working for money. And that can be far ahead of what people normally consider to be retirement at, like, let's say 65. You have some people in the space, as FIRE is, really kind of a large community now that's really cropped up over the years. You have some of the more famous names in the space. First one I was introduced to was a guy named Pete Adney, he goes by the name Mr. Money Mustache on his blog, and he retired in his 30s. So, when most people kind of hear that for the first time, and I know when I heard that for the first time, that's when I got hooked, because I was like, who is this guy? Like, how do you do this? This sounds really ridiculous.
Tell me more.
Tell me more about how you can get to a point where you can call it quits in 10 years. But, the interesting thing about FIRE is, like, you can do whatever you want. It's really retire early is an option. financial independence is really what I think most of the movement has kind of squared itself around, because then you have the option to do the retire early if you want, or you can do something else.
And I think that right there, right? The option to stop trading time for money. And I'm with you, Jeff, as I heard about the movement, learned a little bit more, certainly don't claim to be an expert myself. And like we'll talk about here shortly, there's a variety of options and paths that one can take, certainly not a only one route to do FIRE. But FI resonates with me as a goal that all of us should be considering, and what that means for us, it may be something different depending on our personal situation, our income, our expenses, where we live, all of those things. RE, maybe not. I think there's a lot of things that would go in that direction that would help someone make that decision. But, many pharmacists invested a lot of time and money to get their degree. Many pharmacists love the work that they're doing. And so they may not have that goal of RE, or perhaps it might not be that they have a goal of retiring early, but something life throws at them requires them to pivot away from their work income. And they've put themselves in a position towards FI to be able to make that adjustment. So we're going to dig into more of that, but I want to make sure our listeners, as we have this conversation, don't necessarily hear us talking about FIRE and are making an automatic assumption that every pharmacist needs to aspire to retire in their early or mid 30s, but rather we'll talk about some of the tenets and principles of FI. And of course, that RE is something that some may choose and many others perhaps not. So being passionate about FIRE and financial independence for your own personal journey is one thing. Deciding to invest the time to write a book is another thing. And and I know that there's a significant amount of time and effort that can go into this. So why, Jeff, did you feel the need, besides, me hounding you a little bit of, hey, I think this would be a great topic for pharmacists and would love to see us have more information in this area. Why did you feel like it was necessary to invest the time to write a book that would help pharmacists better understand this path towards FIRE?
Yeah, I never thought about writing a book until you asked me say, hey, would you like to? I think we were originally starting and thinking about making this kind of a short audio book or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then it morphed into more of a full form book. And initially, I got to be honest, you said I want to, would you like to write a book? I thought, hey, that's kind of a cool thing to do. I'd like to, maybe that would be a fun little thing to be able to say, oh yeah, I wrote a book. But as time goes on, I mean, that can kind of get you in the door of doing something. You have to have a reason for why you actually want to complete something. And especially with writing a book, I mean, that's obviously the longest thing I've ever written. You got to have something in the background. And I was thinking to myself, really, I mean, as I was writing the book and kind of thinking about, and all the writings that I've done for the site as well, why do this? And I think that what it boils down to is different people have different ways that they want to serve their profession in general. And I looked at this as like people try to play more to their interests and, how they want to do that, if they want to do that at all. And to be honest, I mean, on the clinical side of things, has never really been, a huge interest of mine. I really enjoy the role that I play in the profession as a community pharmacist, being able to talk with people, help them through their problems and get, better outcomes that way. But, some of the more clinical minded or even like, the legislative minded things that you get into haven't really sparked too much of an interest of mine. But finance does. And I think that finance really it represents an interesting problem that needs to be solved for our profession, particularly as I see it kind of going forward. Because as a profession, I mean, we do need a lot. We need to do a lot, for our profession moving forward to be able to direct it in the ways that I think most pharmacists would like to see it. But financial burdens that get placed, particularly on new graduates who, in my mind, are in a really good spot to be able to try and affect change in our profession, really can be a major hindrance to things actually moving forward. What I see through my writing is, if I can help any of these people get to a point where finance is really not such a burden on their shoulders, they might be able to actually get out from behind the bench and do things that might be more beneficial to our profession, be it, on the legislative end, clinical ends, or even on the entrepreneurial ends, because we really do need, in our profession, we do need to explore different avenues for our services as pharmacists to really evolve our profession as time goes on. And unfortunately, a lot of times when, as I'm sure you're you're an entrepreneur yourself, the beginning stages of a lot of ventures, you don't make a lot. It can be very difficult financially. And it's one thing to kind of come at that sort of a thing, coming out of high school or coming out of college with minimal debt. It's a whole different thing coming out of college.
That's right.
And you have 180,000 plus or whatever student loans, and your minimum payment is similar to a mortgage without actually having a house. That to me, like if you can really kind of help fix that part of the problem, I think that there's a better chance, not a guarantee, but a better chance that our profession will be able to do the things that it needs to do without as much of the weight of the financial burdens that we have already.
Yeah. And Jeff, I shared this with you when I read the first draft. What would that have been back in probably late fall of 2019? I think you've really done an incredible job of taking a topic that can feel overwhelming, especially when you get into some of the weeds on, investing options, considerations, and so forth. And really did a nice job of breaking that down in a way that was easy to understand. It's very conversational for those that like reading blog posts and other things. I think you wrote it in a way that, is not intimidating. It's easy to follow, and it gives people this space to explore this topic and apply it to their own personal situation. And that is something I love, because we know that when it comes to putting a financial plan together, whether you're working with a financial planner or you're doing it yourself, everyone's plan is inherently unique to your own personal situation, to your own goals, to your family situation, to where you live, to all these other factors, whether you have debt and how much and things you're trying to aspire to do. And I feel like you really gave the space for folks to be able to make some decisions and really just understand the options, the pathways, spark some interest in what this is all about. And then hopefully they can take that information and begin to apply it to their personal situation where it makes sense. So as far as I know, this is the first FIRE book specifically as it relates to pharmacy professionals. If someone else wrote one that we don't know about, they can tell me that I'm wrong on that. And I really believe the book is full of valuable information that lays really a strong foundation for pharmacists that are interested in learning about FIRE and how they can set out on the path to achieve it. In the book, you go into detail about paths to FIRE, withdrawal rates, saving rates, budgeting, debt repayment, investing, portfolio considerations, and the list goes on. And we'll talk about some of those in more detail. And one of the highlights for me is we sent this book out to some pharmacists in the YFP community before it was available to order. And the feedback we received was really amazing. Corey Jenks, who we had on in episode 196, said, quote, "This book takes the hours and hours of reading and self-education and condenses it to a simple, easy to read book that has something for anyone along the journey to FI," end quote. And I would certainly agree with what Corey said there. So let's dig into the book a little bit further. You wrote the book FIRE RX, The Pharmacist's Guide to Financial Independence, and you broke it up into 3 parts. Part 1, the why of FI and how it applies to pharmacists. Part 2, how to achieve FIRE. And Part 3, uncertainty surrounding FIRE. So in Part 1, the why of FI and how it applies to pharmacists, talk us through the 3 reasons that you think pharmacists should at least consider pursuing financial independence.
The 3 reasons I really try to lay out there is, first and foremost, it's defensive. Second, it's doable. And then third, as I kind of got into on my little soapbox over there, it's good for the profession, I think. So going to that first point, defense, where I don't think that there's really a whole lot of pharmacists out there in the profession that look at the state of things right now and think, oh, the gravy train is going to keep going and whatnot. You hear stories every day about, you see a lot of them on the Facebook group too, posting about how tough the job market is. People are going in and getting the offers that they're finding are really, they're scary. I mean, they're like a fraction of what I started at 10 years ago. There's a lot of pressure in the marketplace right now in terms of pharmacist salaries. And then also, again, on the student debt side, that side keeps going up. Defensively, pursuing financial independence in particular at a really just basic level. I mean, you don't even need to achieve financial independence to be able to get benefits from the techniques and the things that you would do in the pursuit of it anyway.
That's right.
Because what it basically boils down to is it's just good financial hygiene. So you're getting rid of debt, you're de-risking your whole financial situation and really kind of building yourself up into a position of strength where you can really kind of take whatever life throws at you. Now, that could just be what a lot of other, most people kind of experience. I mean, you could just have things come up in, your personal life too. Say the kid needs to go into the hospital,
Yep.
or you need to go in the hospital, some kind of financial hardship there
Mm-hmm.
that you can absorb, or it could be something more in the lines of the profession. So I remember last year,
Mm-hmm.
remember reading one day one of the major big box stores laid off about 1,000 pharmacists or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a major thing that goes on, and it's a possibility. And I think for many, many years, our profession we didn't really have to think about that. I know when I first went into pharmacy school,
Mm-hmm.
something like that really was not on the radar, really in anybody's mind, especially when we called them fifth years because I went through a 6-year program. But, the P3 students, second semester, you saw a lot of new cars in the parking lot because people were getting 5-figure sign-on bonuses.
Yeah.
How far we've
Remember
gone.
that. Yeah.
So, but I mean, yeah, it boils down to, for defense, it's a good idea to really even just kind of get into this anyway, because as a profession, I think every single pharmacist really needs to be thinking or have in the back of my mind, hey, it might be a possibility that I'm not going to be making more in the future,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a weird concept, if you want to stay in the profession. And I would imagine most pharmacists do want to stay in the profession because we went to school for
Mm-hmm.
a reason and we wanted to be pharmacists for a reason. The second thing, after going, that doom and gloom section, that it's doable. I think currently, with a lot of pharmacists, I mean, the doom and gloom scenario, while it's certainly difficult in a lot of markets, that's not the same same as saying that every market is, this kind of
Absolutely.
situation where
Mm-hmm.
it's really difficult. So for a lot of pharmacists, particularly ones that are practicing now, and especially if you're still making that good paycheck, I think financial independence is perfectly doable. You have a strong income to be able to drive it towards, financial goals. It does take a lot of discipline, takes some knowledge, but you can do it
Mm-hmm.
relatively easily compared to, I would say, a lot of your peers that you might have graduated. People like, let's say that you went to high school, they might have graduated in different fields.
Yep.
I think that it's, as a pharmacist, even though we kind of get down on it, most of us still do make very good money compared to
Mm-hmm.
what a lot of people, especially straight out of college, would be making. And then the last bit, again, I think it's good for the profession. And if you go down this path, and even if you get close to financial independence, you don't even need to get to full financial independence, but even getting there close can remove some of the risk, to your career if you need to do something different.
Yeah.
Be that you really want to get out of the situation that you're in. Maybe you did start working retail after college, but you really didn't want to do that in the beginning, which it's very much like a thing where if you're in a position that you don't necessarily, if you didn't want to be there in the first place, it can be a bad fit and can be difficult for you long term. So if you wanted to contemplate a switch, sometimes, having that, being in a position of financial strength can be very beneficial to you and really kind of remove a lot of the risks surrounding moves there. Also, I mean, if you wanted to pursue entrepreneurial work,
Mm-hmm.
let's say start a consulting business or something like that, where, it's not clear that,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be making the kind of salary that you were making as, a dispensing pharmacist from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably won't. But if you're in a position of financial strength, you can tackle that challenge far easier and far more responsibly, I would say, than someone who doesn't have that position of financial strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all those, Jeff. And the one that resonates with me, and I mentioned this to you as you were writing, is that last one. I'm bullish on the opportunities we have. I'm an optimist by nature, but in terms of where we can go as a profession. But I also recognize that $175,000 of debt and dependence on a 6-figure income with that type of debt is really golden handcuffs to folks taking risks. And I think that is risk both internally. I think folks, if you're really, saddled with debt or don't necessarily have a good financial foundation or position, you're probably not likely within your job to propose new ideas or strategies or take some risk or push back where needed, let alone, look for other opportunities that may be out there that are a better fit for you or that also could help us advance, as a profession. So I believe firmly a big part of why we do what we do at YFP is if we can help offload some of the financial burden of one's individual situation, what does that mean for their career as a pharmacist, or what does that mean for other things that they may want to pursue and may want to do? The other thing, Jeff, I like in part one that you talk about is an FI mindset. And, my question here is what part does mindset play in pursuing FIRE, and what are your core ideas on how one can establish an FI mindset, or perhaps recalibrate the current mindset that they have if it's not in line with that?
The concept I like to get through on the FI mindset part is really when you decide to go for financial independence, you really have to fundamentally change your relationship with money. And what I mean by that is that instead of viewing the money that you bring in simply as the stuff that you pay for goods and services with, you really need to think of money in terms of time. There's a great book, it was written many years ago by lady Vicki Robin and her husband. They equated money to a concept they called life energy. And basically it was when you're spending money on things, let's say you're buying a pair of jeans or you're buying the latte or whatever, you're giving money for those things. But in reality is if you're having to work for that money, what it is that you're exchanging the time value of your work, your life energy for whatever that thing is. Now, most of the time, the small purchases here and there, that's really, they can add up, but it can be immaterial in the long run. But, for some of the big things, like let's say you want to buy that brand new $50,000 car, you take out a car loan, you do that stuff. What you're doing is you are committing a lot of your life energy to buying that car. Like it's not just, I can get this credit. It's like, no. You are committing your life to servicing this debt or whatever that you're spending the money on. Now, the change that gets made is when you kind of look at how money, particularly when you start investing it, can get more money. Then it's like, all right, so I'm going to have this money and then I can save that money and then it can then buy me time. It can buy my life energy back, which I think that's really the cornerstone of the FI mindset that you need to have, is that you're essentially, instead of expending your life energy, your time for things and stuff, you're really just kind of buying back into yourself and giving yourself time back that you wouldn't otherwise have. Once you really kind of understand that, really kind of ingrain that, I mean, I'll tell you, it is kind of an addictive concept because, you end up finding yourself saving money and looking for ways to save money and doing things that you ordinarily wouldn't do because, you kind of feel like, I'm doing this. This is like, you can think of it minuscule, like it's like, oh, that thing's going to give me 15 more minutes back of my time or something like that. That's kind of at the silly end. But I mean, it explains the point a little bit.
I think too, Jeff, sometimes when folks hear that, they may think, oh my goodness, like the frugality of that. And, I'm scraping for pennies. But I think what happens, at least what happens for me when you talk about that concept of the connection between time and money, is that you start to change how you value certain things. So, again, I'm speaking for myself, but I think this may be true with others as well. Like, if you're going to make an investment in an experience, or you're going to make an investment in something else, versus an investment in something that maybe doesn't mean as much to you. And Ramit said, he talks about this idea in the book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, of like, find the things that like have meaning and value to you and figure out how you're going to invest in prioritizing those, and find the things that you don't care about and stop spending money on them. And, I think that has been really an important thing when I think about mindset. And here we're talking about mindset around FI, is like, it really helps begin you to shape and be more, I think, self-aware of when you're spending money. You're not just making that transaction, but you're starting to think a little bit about like, what value do I get or do I not get from this transaction? And is it worth it or not based on the time? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is no. And I think it just helps grow that awareness, and it allows us to pause, stop, think about things and really evaluate it in a little bit more detail. Now, part 2 of the book is really the meat and potatoes. And you did an awesome job in this section, how to achieve FIRE. And we're just going to scratch the surface here with a couple things. But one of the things you talk about in part 2 is you dive into safe withdrawal rates and the 4% rule, which you also talked about on the recent blog post on the YFP website titled How Much You Need to Hang Up Your Coat, all about the 4% rule. And we'll link to that in the show notes. So just give us a high level overview of what the 4% rule is and why that is significant as folks may begin to think about this question of how much I need.
So in a nutshell, the 4% rule refers to a tool in financial planning to be able to judge when a traditional, let's say, traditional portfolio of stocks and bonds can really fund your expenses in perpetuity. So where it comes from a study done by the financial planner William Bengen back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And what he found was that in looking at retirement cohorts from many, many years in the past, he found that the absolute lowest that a retiree could safely withdraw from their portfolio and not run out of money, in his study, it was like over the course of 30 or 50 years, depending on which data you want to look at. But in a nutshell, basically, he said 4% was the lowest, the worst case scenario. That, if you retired and you took out 4% of your portfolio year one, and then year two added the inflation according to the consumer price index to that initial 4%, so on. As the years go on, you keep on adding that inflation. You wouldn't run out of money. And 4% was that worst case scenario. Now, it sounds a little wonky, but what ends up happening is you can take that 4% figure and take the inverse of it, which is 25.
Right.
And then once your investment portfolio reaches 25 times your annual expenses, you can, in theory, I would say, declare yourself to be financially independent, because there's a strong probability that in the future you are not going to run out of money should you just decide to draw down on your portfolio like this. The really powerful thing about the 4% rule and the whole concept of a safe withdrawal rate is not really in the technical details behind it, but it's giving you a goalpost that you can work towards.
That's right.
I remember, it was this kind of a seminal moment, like in my FI journey, that when I read Mr. Money Mustache's post, it was shockingly simple math to early retirement or something like that.
Yeah.
But it laid that out, and I said to myself, oh, okay, so my retirement number, how much I need, is not just this totally nebulous concept where somebody's like, well, you might need like $5 to $10 million. We don't really know. You just need a boatload of money, and
plus or minus 3 million.
Yeah. Just keep saving, kid. And once you get to 65, we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah.
But this actually gave me something more concrete to work with and say, okay, all right, that's a goal, and I can achieve that. But the other interesting thing, too, compared to a lot of the traditional financial planning advice, is that you tend to see in some of the guidelines that get thrown out there for how much you need to retire as it's a multiple of your income, which many people would argue with me about this. But your income is, I think, less in your control than you really think it is. There are a lot of forces way outside your control that affect this thing, be it market forces. So pharmacists are seeing that firsthand with supply and demand of licensed professionals. But it could just be some exogenous event in the market that, you lose your job. Sorry. Or you had a good idea, but now there aren't too many customers for your idea anymore. A lot of things can happen with your income that are outside of your control. However, with the 4% rule, it frames the question of how much you need to retire and how much you need for financial independence in terms of your expenses. Now, some of these may be a little bit outside your control, but you have way more control, at least in my view, of how much you spend versus how much you bring in. So I think it's much more it's extremely powerful in the regard that it really takes the whole notion of your financial destiny and your financial independence out of the hands of whatever's going on externally in the market and putting it much more in your hands, giving you much more influence over that equation.
That's great stuff, Jeff. And I like how you described that calculation towards the FI number as a goalpost, right? It's a starting point. And I think so often we talk about retirement as, I hope I can retire. I wish I can retire. Maybe I can retire at this age. And I think really starting to dig into some of the numbers and taking more control and ownership of what that might look like of your financial plan rather than being reactive to that. And as I mentioned in part 2, this is just one of the many concepts you talk about. You also talk about in chapter 5, your savings rate. In chapter 6, you go into a FIRE approach to debt. In chapter 7, you talk in much more detail about FIRE investing. In 8, investing efficiently. And then finally in 9, which is a question folks probably have often, is it's great if I save it and now I need to pull it out. So how do I, as you say in chapter 9 titled Jailbreak Your Stash, or what's the strategy of actually withdrawing those funds when you need it, which I think is a question for many pharmacists if they're familiar with more traditional tax advantage retirement accounts and they think of things like age 59 and a half or greater. Well, what's the strategy if there's early retirement? So certainly covered in much more detail in the book. Jeff, I want to wrap up here with a question about what you address in part 3 of the book, which is some of the uncertainty surrounding FIRE. And I think this is one that folks hearing this for the first time might begin to think of all the objections to why early retirement may not be a good idea. And this might be, well, what about health insurance? What about other things where I'm dependent upon my income to be able to have some of those types of things. So there are considerations, potential drawbacks. What are some of the big uncertainties that you see related to FIRE that folks should be aware of?
So I think the big one that a lot of people think of right off the bat has to do with health insurance, which, to be honest, I don't think it's as big of an issue or will be as big of an issue as people think, because health insurance is something that it's going to cost more in most regards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some tricks that you can get around it. You can take a look into other forms of health coverage like health ministries, or some people decide to work part-time for a company that offers health insurance benefits in retirement, or they don't stop working. They just kind of get work for the health insurance benefit. But I think, that boils down to you're probably going to have to pay for it. That, I think, is the thing that comes top of mind for a lot of people, especially when you say, hey, you're going to retire at 40 years old. And most people, like, a major consideration is like, well, I'm not retiring until I get Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
It can be less of a burden than people think, but it's still definitely out there. The other thing too, that's a kind of an uncertainty is, outliving your assets too, which kind of goes back a little bit to that 4% rule.
Yep.
And that's why, like, when we were talking earlier about it, you said it's a goalpost, but it's also just kind of a guideline. Like, it's also not set in stone that it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's still very much a concern that you are going to outlive your money. And there are certainly things that you can do to address that, which we talk about in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Not the least of which, surprise, kind of along the same lines of health insurance, is just save a little bit more, give yourself a buffer. The other thing, and I think that probably one of the most important, in terms of uncertainties to FIRE is, let's say you do want to consider retiring early. What do you do from there? That's the major question that, if you're going to be looking at this thing, it's the thing that you should be thinking about throughout the whole journey.
Absolutely.
And you know what? The good news is you don't need to figure it out like before you start, and honestly, I think it's a stupid exercise to even try to do something like that, because this is not going to be pursuing financial independence or early retirement. It's not something that, you're going to be able to say, all right, I'm going to start doing this, and then like 2 years from now, we're going to be there. And my life 2 years from now is probably going to look very similar to it, the way it does now. I would say when people go after this thing aggressively, 10, 15 years might be more realistic for that. When we started ours, that's kind of the time frame we were looking at for it. But even at those kind of time frames, you don't know what your life is going to look like 10 to 15 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't. My son was born 6 months ago, and being a new parent, I didn't know ahead of time really what that's going to look like. I had maybe some idea of what that looks like, but I didn't understand what it was going to look like. So I think that as you're making these plans for the future, it's something to think about. Like, what do you want your life to look like after FI? How or is
Mm-hmm.
pharmacy going to fit into that life after FI? For some people,
Mm-hmm.
I know, for Jason Long, when you had him on, it really didn't. But I think for a lot of other people that are in the profession, it will in some shape or fashion, whether that's,
Mm-hmm.
Even something as simple as like, I want to work per diem for a pharmacy or a hospital or something like that. Or it could be, I've
Mm-hmm.
reached financial independence, and one of my goals for this was to do more outreach work for the profession. And I'm going to do that.
Yep.
These are the things
Mm-hmm.
to think about during the journey, because I definitely think it's worth it to consider. And that, I would say, most of the other problems that people kind of throw around, and I like this term, it gets thrown around actually in the cryptocurrency communities a lot. It's called FUD. It's an acronym, stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And a lot of the FUD surrounding FIRE, really, it's all math. Health insurance, saving for college in the future, or even like long-term care. All these are math problems that you can solve.
That's right.
But the big uncertainty, but it's kind of a good uncertainty, is like, well, now that you have all this time, what do you want to do with it? And how do you want to construct your life afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the big thing I think a lot of people need to think about too, as they're going on with the journey in terms of any kind of uncertainty surrounding the FIRE movement.
That's great stuff, Jeff. And I love how you wrap up the book when you say, quote, when I think about the whole concept of FIRE, I don't really see it as a mad race to the end of work to live a life of leisure. I see it as being a tool that can help people live their best lives. Nothing more, nothing less. And what you'll get out of it is up to you. So, Jeff, great work. We really have just scratched the surface on the book, FIRE RX, The Pharmacist's Guide to Financial Independence. Congratulations on your efforts. I think it's going to have a significant impact on many pharmacists out there. Appreciate you taking the time and the effort to put the book together, and looking forward to getting it into others' hands. So, Jeff, again, thanks for the time coming on today and your efforts in putting together the book.
Thanks for having me on.
And to those listening, don't forget that Jeff's new book, FIRE RX, The Pharmacist's Guide to Financial Independence, is now available to order. For just 1 week, FIRE RX is 20% off to celebrate the release of this incredible book with the YFP community. Visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/FIRE and order your copy of FIRE RX by May 22nd to get this special discount. Again, that's yourfinancialpharmacist.com/FIRE. Have a great rest of your week.